Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. If there's one thing that the Chinese wanted to showcase to the world, it is the Belt and Road Initiative, or as they like to call it, One Belt, One Road, OBOR. They wanted to connect the world in Chinese characteristics, if I may, with this particular road, maritime links, digital Silk Road, and a whole lot of other jargon that they came out with. We need to understand what this is and is it actually working. And for that, I have with me one of my favorite China analysts, Dr. Geeta Kochhar. Ma'am, thank you so much for coming back. Your insights have been really, really good for, especially for me to understand what's happening with China. In the past two episodes, we've actually touched upon some stuff which is not spoken about, and I'm grateful that you've actually taken all the time and are helping us to understand China a little better.
Thank you, Adi. It's always a pleasure to have discussion on your channel and talk a lot about it. I see very interesting videos that come out in your channel and no nonsense stuff which is coming out. So that's more interesting to listen to and of course interesting to join.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, before we find out whether Xi Jinping and gang failed or passed, but what did they want to do? In my little understanding, they wanted to kind of push out the extra Chinese capability in terms of production outside China and kind of keep the pace of growth continuing. And of course, if there
Right.
was a strategic benefit, why not? Was
Hmm.
that the thought process, or they went for the strategic benefit and the economic growth was uh, just one of the benefits? How would you kind of explain the BRI, ma'am?
Um, okay, so I mean, when Xi Jinping came in 2012, of course there were challenges within China in terms of how they want to, stabilize the overall society and how they want to, take forward the economy that is moving. I mean, there were challenges for the economy as well, right? So Xi Jinping, in that sense, was taking over China at two junctures. One juncture was China what was at its height. Economically, it was very strong. But the other juncture was there were a lot of internal challenges, social contradictions were high, protests were high, and then where from there, how do you proceed further? I mean, it was still a middle income country. It was not able to be a very industrialized nation. It had to become an industrialized nation. It was to really go forward in terms of you know strategies of becoming a global power. Right now, what is that global power all about? That was one challenge which Xi Jinping really failed to understand at that point of time. So he had to really make a balance between how he moves forward, and each step has to be in sense where by 2050 they could become a global power in not just in economic terms, military terms, in a real sense of taking the responsibility at the global stage. So when we talk about say BRI, I mean, say from early 2000 onwards itself, you can see, China promoted the development of the Western sector, which under a policy called Shiputa Kaifa. And why they were focusing on the Western sector was because there was as I said, there were challenges internally. There was an imbalance created within China. So the eastern sector, which was where the special economic zones were established and the openness were taking place, that had developed too far in comparison to the whole of western sector in China. So if you see from Xinjiang to Sichuan to Yunnan, or even Tibet and all of that areas, so the west section of China lagged behind. There was this regional imbalance. Okay, and then of course there were other imbalances of urban rural imbalances, imbalances in terms of the income and all of that. So they started to focus on this western sector, and when in fact Deng Xiaoping started with this whole reform process in 80s as well, the whole idea with which Deng Xiaoping started was like the process of reform and opening up would be something like a dragon, right? So the dragon head is Shanghai and the other areas, the four SEZs that they established, and the tail was supposed to be this, the Western sector. And the idea was that when the development will take place in the Eastern sector, there would be a trickling down effect eventually on the western sector or the interlands of China, and gradually the whole of interland will also progress. But when Xi Jinping came to power, this did not happen. There was no automatic trickling down effect or spillover effect on the western sector. So this gap was really going wide. Okay. So they started to really focus on this in the 2000 by 2000 itself. But yet, when Xi Jinping came in 2012, these challenges were huge. So one of the idea behind this, what we call the Western Sector Development or Shiputak Haifa was also to spread the prosperity to backward regions while diffusing the rising social contradictions, as I'm saying, especially among the minority nationalities, because minority nationalities in Xinjiang or in Tibet or even in Inner Mongolia and all is a huge challenge for the sustainability of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as to sustain their legitimacy as the at the helm of it. So this was one of the important aspect of it. uh, and it also promoted Chinese enterprises to start going go global kind of a slogan. Go global was something like zo chu chi, you just go out. That could actually result in something called what we say is developing the borders and enriching their people. Okay, this was the strategy. So once you develop the borders, and this was the strategy China has adopted in Tibet as well. They think that when the economy will be better, when the borders will be developed, and people will be enriched, they would be wealthy. Automatically, the issue of identity will be dissolved. Okay,
Mm.
so people will not be questioning the CCP in terms of the rule, but they would be busy in their material wealth, trying to make more money, which actually happened in Tibet. Okay, so this was the internal constraints. In terms of the external challenges, I think what Xi Jinping was facing was a challenge of whether they can continue with the kind of exports that were happening. Because if you know the China's development, it was all based on an export oriented market economy, right? So this export oriented market economy actually was facing challenges because of two reasons. One, because it was based on a low cost labor thing. Okay, the success of China's export oriented economy was based on a low cost labor, which was abundantly available within China till this point of time. And second, there were markets in US and Europe which were paying heavily to the Chinese. But internally, what happened is this low cost labor thing started to gradually go down the drain. And by say 2012 or something, when Xi Jinping was came to power, uh, the labor shortage thing started. The population started to decline, and the labor shortage thing started to come up. By 2017 itself, you will see there were talks about labor shortage in China. Okay, the industries were not having low
Mm.
cost labor. Okay, so these were the challenges which Xi Jinping was facing. And externally, because it was talking about export oriented, but whether the markets in US and Europe were uh, enough to continue this export oriented thing or not, because many of the quality checks and other things started to pop up. Many issues with the Chinese products started to the copyrights, intellectual property rights, the quality of the products that were being sold, and also the decline of the markets per se in US and Europe. So all these factors were there. So what Xi Jinping did was he tried to collate all of the projects that were going within China, whether it was the Shiputak Haifa or whether there were these maritime, infrastructure projects and things like that, combined into one. Also to resolve one of the very important factor, which you just mentioned in terms of the overproduction of steel and coal and everything within China. They had to really find out markets. So Xi Jinping actually combined all the projects that were there in China into a signature campaign sort of thing, which is called now as he started calling it as One Belt, One Road thing. But it was a grand project. Everyone said that it's a signature project of Xi Jinping, whereby he linked all the small projects into one, set of policy, or one concept, you may say that. And under that concept, he wanted to really push this whole, PRI thing. So that was one idea. I mean, it's just the beginning that I'm talking about in terms of what PRI is all about, how it started with Xi Jinping. You know, and eventually you will see that as he's moving towards this whole project, under one thing, he started to talk about infrastructure projects, connectivities, and gradually it is moving on and on. I mean, the digital health, everything now is added in this period, in the post COVID or COVID and post COVID period. So there's an addition to all of that under this BRI. So it is one strategic project in terms of the influence China wants to make as a global
Hmm.
power, as a responsible global power. It is a military project because there are military alliances China is trying to build. And it is also an economic plan for China's long term sustainability as an economic powerhouse.
All
I
in one
feel like
sort of
that.
an approach.
Yeah, all in one sort of approach.
Did they really calculate what they were doing, ma'am? Because by the looks of the countries that they've kind of gotten involved with, and here was I read somewhere, I forget where, ma'am. The author had mentioned only one thing: the Chinese looked for gaps, and they didn't mind if your brother-in-law got rich. It didn't matter to them. What they wanted is an entry into the country. But did they actually do the research in terms of what they actually wanted to achieve? We know about that road to nowhere, the bridge to nowhere. Of course, if I say just Pakistan, that's enough. Did they really do the research?
See, I mean, I don't go by the narratives that are being floated, and every narrative has its own agenda
Yeah, yeah,
behind it.
absolutely.
You're right. So, but I'm talking in terms of what happens within China and from their perspective. That would be very essential for Indians to understand so that they break the whole Western narrative and look to China from what China is. Okay. Maybe you can have different opinions about whether it is right or wrong, and you can continue to argue on all of that. But
Hmm.
having said that, I think it is very wrong to posit that China never thought about the projects that it was taking. In fact, because I have stayed in China and I really understand China. China, do, as a state, as a country, does not function on one proposal coming from somewhere and the bureaucrats make it and it is passed. It never functions like that. China has a very strong system of, top down and bottoms up approach. Now, top down
Hmm.
is where from Xi Jinping to other, leaders, they will push something which they want things to understand. Say, for example, if they want to build a relation with a new country, whether it is in Africa or in any other country, or maybe the already existing, relations with China and India, and they want to really push that relationship, then they, from the top, there would be, a sort of a directive which will come down to every level of the local authorities as well as to the institutions, think tanks, universities, and to the level of the students, right? That you need to study this, you need to understand this. This is a directive which will come from the top, okay? And the bottoms approach is that bottoms up approach is that every university, think tank, students, scholars at every level will do a particular research in a particular field, and all that will be absorbed in a parallel system which China has created, which is a party system. Okay, there's a government structure, okay, and there is a party structure. So in the government structure, the policies will be like the local authorities and the bureaucrats would make, right? But at the party structure, the local people will bring out from the from the think tanks, from the schools, from the universities, from you know um, wherever they can, all those consultancy firms that are running. Even the SOEs will have consultancy firms, or the sections who would be studying, and all that would be accumulated and go up to the upper levels as after an accumulation of whatever the data they've collected. And then there would be a central research unit of the CCP which will do the research on what is happening. Okay, now this is how China works generally. Now, in terms of BRI, I mean, as I said, these projects were already going on. Some of the projects, like the BCIM, the individual projects, Western sector development, as I'm saying, the notion that they have to have connectivity from the west to the outside world, so that the western sector also gets industrialized. All these projects were already going on. So what Xi Jinping did with his team, and of course the support of the the Communist Party's strategists, as well as the bureaucrats of the policy advisors of the government, what they did was they really accumulated all of that to understand how in a comprehensive manner China can go forward. Now when I see the projects like, say for example, Hambantota project in Sri Lanka, or maybe something in Gwadar project in Pakistan. When people say that it goes nowhere, it is failed project, it does not yield, there's a lot of debt, the burden of debt is huge. Uh, China at every point tries to have what they call it as from a trial project they have something called as Shriyan tests. Okay, which actually was the statement of Deng Xiaoping. If you go back to Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up in 80s, he started to say that you have to cross the river by feeding for the stones. What it actually meant was, 过着石头,摸着石头过河. Basically, you need to check at every point whether it is successful or not, then advance. Okay, so here also what Xi Jinping was doing is they may have. I mean, I do not deny that they faced challenges. The debt was high. Then again, the research will come in. Okay, so again, from top to bottom, the directive or the directions will be given. You have to study this. Then they will come out with the solutions to it. How you need to manage it up, and it will go to the top level. And if something is really not working, then what they will do is they will try to evaluate how we can make it successful rather than accepting that it is a failed project. And so if I go back to say somewhere in 2017 or so, when I was in China, in Fudan University, there is a department which was working on bricks. Okay, and that time, if you see 2016 and 17, there was whole narrative of bricks is a failed thing. Nobody wants to talk about bricks. Who are the countries who are flourishing? Bricks do not exist anymore. I mean, the emerging economies that we were talking about, newly emerging economies that we were talking about, is all gone. The charm of those emerging economies do not exist. Brazil was in the negatives. South Africa was having a minus, economic growth, something like that, right? Okay, India was still okay, but BRICS did not work. And I talked to the director and I said, you are still having a department of BRICS. Do you really see that BRICS will work somewhere? And do you see any hope on that? And he was so very positive about it. You don't know, Geeta. BRICS is actually working and we are going to make it work. And today, if I see to BRICS again, there is a revival. You see? So I'm just giving you an example of how things will move. So last year itself, when people were talking about BRICS, BRI is dead. BRI is not going to take up. BRI is a failed project of Xi Jinping. All those things that started coming up. I don't think that will happen. BRI is not dead. BRI is already there in CCP's, Chinese Communist Party's, PRC's constitution. It is the CCP's grand project. It is Xi Jinping's dream project as well. And it is also for the sustainability of Xi Jinping in power. So even if it is going to fail and China will have to, push up more money to make it work, I think they will do it. Okay. So this is where I think we need to understand the difference between how Chinese work and how the whole world sees it. Challenges will definitely be there. And I know that within China, when they talked about the challenges, they had talked about the challenges of, say, for example, the debt burden, one of the important things when we talk of Pakistan. There was a lot of critics within China, they're saying that, this debt burden is going up and how that sustainability will work. In the second Belt and Road International Cooperation Summit that was held in Beijing in April 2019, this debt sustainability analysis framework was announced by China in cooperation with international financial institutions, which itself is commendable. I mean, which itself shows how they are moving for this debt burden thing. Then the challenges were in terms of, say, transportation burden, right? How that will take place. So cross-border travel, transportation, everything was, there were multiple restrictions, and how that will be, managed. So there was a discussion within China, and the Chinese said that, we need to, expand the cross-border movement of goods, services, and of course people, which actually directly, impacts their multiple channels, including shrinking trade and everything. And they knew that there was a current severe damage to the global value chain, which actually, intensifies the cross-border flow of goods. And so they started to work on how that needs to be resolved. So with each country at a bilateral level, they have started to negotiate on these things. Uh, I mean, these are one of, I mean, these are some of the ways that Chinese actually move when they face challenges in terms of, and then they are talked about the financial institutions. They are trying to, you know, talk about the infrastructure projects as well as the financial institutions that need to be reformed. They are building parallel institutions which can support the BRI projects, right? AIIB was one of the institutions which China has really taken, care of, where it can support many of the projects of BRI. So, in one sense, they would find alternative approaches to resolve the issues that are coming. So, BRI is
Hmm.
not going to be dead. That is for sure. The pace may be slow because of multiple issues that we see.
Ma'am, where, okay, let me there's a lot which is being said about the BRI in terms of what they wanted to get, right? Where did they want to reach? And it's about trade with Europe. There were some trains that were
Right.
sent across, and this and that. Now we know there's a lot of issues because of the Ukraine war. Of course, some of those lines went through, lines of communications went through Ukraine. Uh, could you help us understand what they wanted to achieve, especially in the, if I may, Eurasia region, and of course the maritime Silk Road, as they touted to be? And I know you've got certain maps ready, so it'll be really helpful if you can explain that to us and help us understand the challenges they faced as they went by towards their ultimate goal.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right in terms of Europe. There were many reports that I also read. The train was going, and then the SOEs had a huge burden to, run those bogies. They were like one banner for everyone. The bogies were same. All of those stories. I mean, I've read all of that, and what was happening within China also. But let's talk from a very simple perspective of BRI. It's basically a very grand notion to revive the ancient Silk Route that connects China, India, Persia, and Rome through land routes and the maritime, expeditions of Chinese admiral that they call as Changhe. Okay, so you can see that, the idea was basically to link across countries and regions with an initial amount of, say, 4 trillion US dollars. That was foreign reserves to resolve the problem of overproduction of steel and cement via inter-regional trade. So China's energy demands were growing, and China's visions and actions, if you see, at that point of time, it clearly stated that the communications in procuring and transportation is a major goal of the One Belt, One Road at that point of time, when they started. And oil and gas procurement is the reason for transport networks. If you see the first map, you will see that it comprised of, two main components. Okay, one is the Silk Road economic belt and 21st century maritime Silk Route. They were the two broad routes. Okay, the initiative was geographically structured along 6 corridors with 5 land routes, as you can see in this map. Basically, these land routes were linking Mongolia, Central Asia, Russia, Iran, Turkey, the Balkans, Central and Eastern Europe, and finally to Germany and the Netherlands. Okay, and the one maritime route that we are talking about, that was linking Southeast China with Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, India, the Persian Gulf, and the metropolitan Mediterranean up to Germany and the Netherlands. So you can see in the the next, slide as well. These are the two. I mean, the first and second map will actually show you the nodes that they were connecting.
Hmm.
In New Eurasian, and so if you see these nodes, basically they were like, one was New Eurasian land bridge, which was running from Western China to Western Russia. If you go back to the first map, okay. And the second was China, Mongolia, Russia corridor, which was running from northern China to eastern Russia. The third was China, Central Asia, West Asia corridor, which was running from Western China to Turkey. Fourth was China, Indo-China Peninsula corridor, which was running from southern China to Singapore. Then there was Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor, which was running from southern China to India. There was China, Pakistan corridor, economic corridor, which was running from south western China to Pakistan, which is very controversial for us. Then there is the Maritime Silk Road, which was running from the Chinese coast through Singapore to the Mediterranean. So in 2016, this One Belt, One Road, which was named as Belt and Road Initiative later, in 2016, this has been a part of the PRC constitution, as I just mentioned, till 2018, and a grand plan for China's foreign policy till 2049. Okay, so by 2050, this is going to be the project. China is accelerating the construction of strategic Xinjiang, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railway line now, which has been added to it, which is quite delayed now. And it is also further accelerating connectivity with Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, which is again a new addition to this whole project. And in parallel, the CPEC will be extended to Afghanistan. So whether that will happen or not is still not sure. But on May 5th, 2023, this year, China, during its ministerial meeting with Afghanistan and Pakistan, had agreed to extend CPEC to Afghanistan. Okay, so this is the broad grand strategy. New things have been added. There's the health, connectivity that has been added. Digital Silk Road has been added, and Xi Jinping has started to talk about three other factors which are very crucial for BRI. One is the Global Development Initiative, the other is Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization
Civilization.
Initiative. So these three are again encompassed under the BRI project. So what I'm saying is the BRI is constantly getting expanded. This was the first map, which was the beginning, right? And many things have been added now under these, connectivity projects itself. So it is not just a connectivity project; it's a grand project for Xi Jinping to spread its influence, spread its, wings to the whole world, and show it as a responsible power. Another very interesting thing which people would want to know about is under this global civilizational initiative, where China has already done something about Saudi Arabia and Iran as a
Mhm.
mediator, try to pacify the things. It is now looking at Palestinian and Israel issue,
Israel.
right? So that again will be countered as saying that this was all under the BRI, because this was under the global civilization initiative, where we wanted to mediate the civilizational confrontations, something like that. Yeah.
Ma'am, I mean, I just want to switch to map number two. If you look at the nodes that they have kind of created around, and this is a beautiful map, I must say. You found this, it's amazing. These nodes that they created, uh, see, at the end of it, when you're going to be trading, you would also need a certain amount of expansion in terms of your own reach, your own
Right.
physical reach. You can't be depending on a pathway country to kind of help you out. It's not going to happen, right? You will have issues and this and that. How did they plan for something like that, going forward into the future as the trade levels rises up? I mean, right now it's what, one two trains to Europe, or probably 10, 15, 20, 30, 100. It's not much. A train doesn't carry as much as load as a container ship. They can send 100 trains and the same amount could go through a container ship. How do they
Hmm.
kind of, when they want to expand that, how do they kind of create their own self presence within these nodes that they've created, ma'am?
Yeah. So China is working with each country on a bilateral, this thing to find the nitty-gritties of it. Okay.
Ma'am.
You are right that one train will not carry anything, but if you see, the projects China has, say for example in Nepal. Okay, let's take a
Mm.
very nearby example.
Ji.
In Nepal, when they talked about the BRI, they signed the BRI when Prachanda was the last time Prachanda was the prime minister. They signed the MOU for BRI, right? And under that, one of the projects was the railway connectivity from Tibet to Kathmandu, right? Now, if you see the nitty gritties when the Nepalese were talking to the Chinese, was the train is going to pass through ecological, conservative areas. It will not be very feasible to cross that, and how that is going to manage. Now, what China is doing with every state is that they push the internal problems on the particular state. Okay, you resolve. So if there is a problem in Baluchistan, in Pakistan, they will tell the Pakistanis to resolve it. Okay, and suppose that problem is not able to be resolved. Say, for example, in terms of Baluchistan in Pakistan, they are not able to manage it up. China will propose their own military to be sent to those areas. Okay, it has already done with Pakistan. Okay, they have already said that our PLA, will go with arms and ammunition to take care of the turmoil that is happening out there. Now it is up to the country whether that would allow or not, because say, for example, Nepal or even Pakistan for that matter would not be very comfortable in letting external powers military come and manage the affairs of internal issues, right? That itself is giving up all your this thing. The second thing is comes in terms of, say, for example, China, Nepal. Even if the train comes, even if the railway connectivity is done after all the feasibility and other things which are challenges for construction of it, what would be that Nepal would export to China? Of course, the imports will be very high, but what is that Nepal is going to send to China? There wouldn't be much. Nepal is not producing. It's not a manufacturing hub which is going to produce anything. So China is really not thinking about that, because, as I said, this whole issue is for their own production to be sent for their energy needs. And so they will say that it is a win-win in the sense that we are helping you build up infrastructure, and what we gain is our thing. Okay, so the infrastructure, now the issue would be whether they are building up whole of that infrastructure in Nepal, because Nepal is a small country which cannot bear the burden of the railway project that is going to come up. Now, within Nepal itself, there was a huge uh, turmoil of discussions on how that will materialize, because when they initially the Chinese proposed, they said, okay, we will give you something around 70% of the cost, and you bear the sorry, we will bear the 60% cost and you bear the 40% cost of it. Now, for
Mm.
that 40% cost for Nepal means something around 70 to 80% of their GDP, which is a huge amount. Okay, for one railway project, I mean, if Nepal is going to shed out that much money, it, definitely Nepal will go something like what Sri Lanka went to, right? Economic crisis, and the people will be on the streets, and there would be huge disaster. Then they started negotiating with the Chinese, and the Chinese finally, I mean, they started proposing that at least you, bear the 70% cost, and we will bear 30% cost. So still, it is in the the feasibility reports have not come, but the Nepalese were very happy at the people level, at the government level, at the leadership level, that there is going to be a train coming from China to Nepal, and the people can move easily to China, and there would be openings for the Nepalese. The leaders also gave this dreamy thing to the people, and the people were also very excited for this. So, so all the discussions within Nepal revolved around, boiled down to one thing, that we need the project, that is, we need the railways. Now, whether that would be really beneficial for Nepal's economy or not is another factor, which which they will face eventually, like something which happened in Hamantota. And at the same time, Chinese are very clear, because they are real businessmen. Okay, when they negotiate something in terms of of this train or other projects, whether infrastructure projects or anything, maybe airports or anything, they talk about the ownership rights of it as well. Okay, these are all there in the document. uh, this is what actually came out in the Hambantota thing, right? they negotiated about if you are not able to bear the cost of it, which actually these countries cannot bear, then the ownership right will go to China. So it will be something like what the Britishers did as a British company, they did.
Mm.
So this is a sort of that strategy from where the Chinese had
Predatory.
learned.
Mm.
Yeah. So you do this, and then you will be having the lease. I mean, China had faced that in Hong Kong with the 99 years of lease. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So they
yeah.
know that they are going to do the same thing for the other countries. It may be, I mean, you will think this is a colonial thing, but they will say this is business. Okay, we negotiated the business. So the terms and conditions at which the decision will be taken on any project will be in the minute lines that you need to really read. Okay, Indians really, Indian government did tell to Sri Lanka also that it will not be feasible, but Sri Lanka went over ahead. You
That's
see,
my whole question, ma'am. When I asked you about the study, now here's a country that doesn't earn as much as you're investing into it. You're building up a tower in the middle of Colombo worth what, $2 billion, and
but you
to,
see
I
this,
mean,
this say for example, civil, Hambandota project
yeah,
itself.
yeah,
It's not just a commercial project, right? Gradually there would be military uses for it. Okay, and China knows that if it has to become a global power, it needs to have military bases in many of the countries. Right now they don't have it.
fair enough.
I mean, in comparison to what US has and its allies have, China does not have those many military bases. Okay, so it would need to have those military bases acquired in Australia. Hambandota will gradually convert into a civil military because there's already a civil military fusion within China for everything. So that will be eventually, a purpose that would be solved for the Chinese. So Chinese are moving from a global power perspective and not just
Ah,
as a local, what do you say, Kherat Batna sort of
so
thing. It's not,
study
yeah.
was done for Chinese benefit, not for the country's benefit.
Naturally, I mean, they are doing for their own country benefit. I mean,
Yeah,
when they talk about community of common destiny, destiny is under Chinese rule. You
under
see,
the mandate of from heaven.
whatever. Yes, we have done that.
No, ma'am, this was very interesting because I always had this particular doubt that it's like you're telling me आधी एक गड्ढा खोल दे अपने, you dig a hole right in front of you and now go fall into it, and that's what has happened. And it's either they played up on the vulnerabilities of these countries where they approached them at a time when they really needed funds, and this and that, or it was bribery and deceit and stuff like that, but they achieved what they wanted to, and I think that makes the point. Ma'am, now the spread out into Africa is
Mm.
something very interesting to me because you've gone into places like Angola and all that stuff, which is, fair enough, ports, bases, okay. Have they overstretched themselves in terms of this? Have they overcommitted themselves uh, in terms of their expenses? That's point number one. Two is you've got a port like Hambantota, ma'am, which is now
Mm.
not giving you any money, right? It's an expense. And 10 years down the line, it's a capital asset. You'll have to do repair maintenance. Something will crack here, something will break there. So it's going to be an added continuous expense for the future. In your perception, has these two things been factored into their long-term plans in terms of financials, ma'am?
Okay, so another thing which people need to understand when China is doing, say for Hambantota or anything, there is a public-private partnership model which China really uses well for all its projects. Okay, when
Hmm.
it deals with any country. So what is this public-private model? Is that there are SOEs, state-owned enterprises in China. Okay, uh, which will have subsidiaries like the private companies. Okay, who are making big money. So they will employ these private companies to engage in a particular project. Okay, and because they are under the state owned enterprises, right, the public enterprises as we say, uh, the ownership will come to the state owned enterprises. So in one sense, if there were small losses at the local level, all that will be bared by the private company. okay, the private contractors. And they will have to find out solutions to make money to manage these losses. Okay. The state owned enterprises burden will definitely be high as well in comparison to, because it's a public, it's a partnership sort of thing. But state owned enterprises are hugely subsidized and funded by the state, by the
Hmm.
Chinese state. Okay. And one of the things which I and many of my friends used to really talk in China was that what happens when the burden of the SOEs go very high? As you were just mentioning earlier, the Europe, train. Uh, each enterprise had to shell huge amounts to run that train. If you would have seen those pictures, everyone was dressing same. All the bogies were same color, same paint, same things. Uh, so every enterprise had to actually push that so as to make it look like it is a China train going,
Yeah.
right? And by look and everything, it was very nice, it was beautiful, it was all perfect in looks. But the cost burden that you're talking about was very huge for every state owned enterprise at that point of time. But then it is, within the state owned enterprise, it is the manager who will have to see how the resource allocation needs to be managed, whether they need to cut down on the social welfare budgets of the employees, whether they need to push for overproduction of something so that they can make more money, or they need to go commercialize, which all of the media and everything has started doing in China. And state owned companies are using commercial ways, or use any other illegal means to make money, right? So this burden, and within the state-owned enterprises, interestingly, apart from the company head, which is called the maybe it will be a director or maybe a CEO or whatever, there would be a Communist Party head as well, who would be above this CEO of the company. Okay, who would be giving direction as to what this company needs to do. Okay. So now, if Xi Jinping has said that the train has to go in this manner, even if the cost is quite high, and the party person has already told within the company, to the board of directors that this is the burden you have to bear, it is for the company to find out ways how they would make more money, exploit more people, or cut down on any other things, maybe taxes or social welfare systems and things like that, so that they can make more money. Okay. And the
Wow.
debt burden goes down. Now, this debt burden is also linked to the banks in China. I mean, if you would have seen Gordon Chang's book when he was talking about the coming collapse of China, that book was all talking about the burden of the state-owned enterprises and state-owned enterprises taking loans from the banks and banks collapsing as it collapsed in US. I don't think that will happen in China, because in China there is a circulatory motion that is also happening. You know, Um one of the things which me and my friends used to laugh at, the friends in China, I mean, the Indian friends in China who used to laugh and say, maybe what the Chinese will do is they'll produce more money. They'll just print more money and put it in the bank, and the bank will give. So I don't know whether they actually do that or not, because we have no data about how much money they're, printing and how much is given. But looking at the foreign reserves that the Chinese have, they have a huge money, right? They can, at any point of time, they can just sell those US treasuries or whatever and then get money, which is what they're doing right now. So in one sense, that circulatory linkages which China has created, from its bank to state-owned enterprises to the private, what we call the tertiary industries, to the private contractors, is a whole network of chains, and all linked with the party people as well. So the party people anyway know what is happening and where the cost is going to be. So if
Wonderful.
tomorrow the Hamban Tota thing goes, that the cost is high, maybe they will find some other alternative sort of thing. Maybe push one more place to give their assets and then make money from there and push it here. Some
Ju-
rebalancing sort of thing.
or just throw it off. I mean,
Maybe throw it off. I mean, I don't
yeah,
think they will throw it off, because it's going to be a military use as well. So, but they would find out ways to deal with it.
yeah, of course. That's pretty natural. One can understand that. Ma'am, coming towards the end of this, this is honestly, it's been quite an eye opener for me because you don't connect realism when you're talking about this kind of Chinese strategy. Now, you mentioned the banks and the private institutions that have invested into these. That's obviously a lot of arm twisting happening. Ki, shuru ho
Right.
ja. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of that happens there. Now, with with the recent actions of Xi Jinping trying to muzzle up the private institutions within China to get back that state control, the profitability of these institutions has taken a beat, and this is something that the Chinese have reported themselves. Now, when you don't have that kind of tertiary income or tertiary revenue to deal with, and as you said, the Chinese today have been laying off their treasury bonds and to raise the money. And how long will they be able to sustain this? This is a large project, trillions of dollars. How long will they be able to kind of hold this thing together to push this forward? And of course, within themselves as well. If you've already mentioned that the Chinese may just start printing money, that tells me a lot in terms of their capacity to carry this forward. Am I right or wrong, ma'am?
The burden is huge to sustain this mega project of trillions of dollars. Uh, but many of the, as I said, they have completely added new things into it, right? The
Hmm.
digital Silk Route, right? The technology route, which is the digital thing. Now, when the digital will also come into it, right? Uh, Maybe they will try, okay? They will try to make money by selling, the smartphones, which they've done in India as well. They will try to make money from, I mean, and that is one of the reasons why they're exploring new markets, whether it is Africa or India. Why they are so interested in India? India is a huge potential market for many of the things. I mean, the railway line which is going to come to Nepal is not going to stay till Nepal. The whole thing
Mhm.
Chinese are negotiating is that needs to be connected to India, right? Because once it is connected to India, I mean, the whole market is open for the Chinese, right? So Chinese are looking for the new markets for one of the reasons that they can make revenue from various sources. And I think this notion of commercialization is so into every individual in China that nobody works beyond money in China. Uh, as you said, the burden would be quite high, and how long they can sustain with it, it all depends upon how other markets will be reacting to China's approaches. Whether, say, for example, India is going to be a major challenge for China when
Yeah.
we are talking about you know, made in India. Make in China will be facing the challenge. The whole world factory would be sort of partially shut down because Indian are going to produce. So that will be a challenge for the Chinese, right? Second thing is that whether some of the countries like US and Europe, they've talked about trade war, they've talked about decoupling, and they're talking about de-risking and all of that. Whether that market will continue to accept Chinese products or not. Third thing is it also matters whether the Chinese will be accepted by the other countries or not. We saw that huge racial uh, problem with China Australia, right? In Australia there was a huge problem. They need to negotiate at every point of time. uh, as of now they are banking on other factors as well. I am sure that if I go from international relations theory perspective, something goes wrong, China may just wage a war in Taiwan and try to grab Taiwan. That itself will solve many of the internal issues, the challenges which where people are going to be on the roads when SOE companies, the leaders are going to be on the roads and say, protesting against the Communist Party or the leadership of Xi Jinping. So, so you have all nationalistic rhetoric will come up in order to pacify. But in terms of the reality of economics, I do see that there are commercial challenges which are every country is facing in terms of recession and everything. So China is also facing. It is already in this step burden. It is also facing huge challenges. Every individual in China I talk to are really thinking about their employment and their money. So all that will be a problem. Banks are in huge debt. How that is going to come up. So it all depends upon how China will proceed from this transition of labor intensive to a high tech, and if it is successful in this high tech, whether it will also be successful in the outer space. Okay, all these technologies will help China to mitigate these cost problems, because once you are moving from a middle income country to an industrialized nation, you know, it would be something which happened in Europe or in, the other Western powers, right? They would be able to, mitigate. British Empire was dying, but industrialization helped it to sustain. You see,
Hmm.
so something of that sort is where China's President Xi Jinping is banking on, as I understand. So let's see if that really works, because there are huge challenges. The countries are not very happy with how China is performing. It's not taking the responsibility. Then, there are all intellectual property rights issues,
Yeah, yeah.
the dumping of goods issues, which people are very concerned about. India is not really, uh, in favor of China's, expanded dumping of goods within India and not accepting the trade deficit and everything. So every country is looking into it. It all depends on how globalization will reshape.
Ma'am, just a final word. I think you've brought out the picture very well. I want to ask your personal opinion. You've been studying this for a while. How much would you rate? What would be your personal rating on the effort that the Chinese have put across to kind of, let's keep it simple, strategically connect with the world? Uh, I think I am able to cover up the military and the geopolitical and every aspect when I say that. And your thought process in terms of where they're headed, because the times are, as you said, pretty, sorry, pretty choppy, and the last option is obviously, put the flag up, and the balloon goes up and you go into war. But your personal perception with regards to what they've done till now, and would they be able to do this going forward?
Um, See, till now, BRI as a whole umbrella project, if I see, is
Hmm.
not a successful project for sure. It has not yielded what Chinese really wanted it to yield
Wow.
at the economic level. Okay, but at the strategic level, it has really helped China to gain advantage of relations with many countries. The kind of notion which Professor Yan Shui had talked in, way back, a few years back, in terms of building of community of common destiny, which was basically of building military alliances. China is proceeding from a geostrategic perspective to that line. Okay, it has built up China, Pakistan, Afghanistan nexus, China, Pakistan, Iran nexus, China, Nepal, and Pakistan nexus. All of these, strategic within our neighborhood. I'm talking about then China, Bangladesh, China, Myanmar, and Bangladesh, China, Sri Lanka. See, all of in South Asia, and of course the Southeast Asia. And I'm not talking about what is happening in US and all of that, right? So at a geostrategic level, because they know that they have a strong competitor, which is US led, the whole allies, right? Which it needs to deal, and there would be what do you say, unending challenge for the Chinese till actually it becomes a superpower, which is going to be really tough, because these countries are going to really slow down the process of China's economic growth, right? So it understands that. So at a geostrategic level, it has tried to go away from that concrete direct confrontation with the US and build relations with alternative countries. Like, for
Hmm.
example, in Saudi Arabia, what China has done itself has made US to cool down a little bit in the trade war with China. You see, so in one sense, at a geostrategy level, this BRI itself is conducive for the way the Chinese are working. At the strategic level, I think China is very clear of building alliances, military alliances with countries. Now, it understands in the neighborhood, whether it is, say, for example, all weather ties with Pakistan, is not a reliable partner when it comes to a military confrontation of China with any country. I mean, they cannot rely on Pakistan to be a permanent, partner who would be supportive of China. Okay, so even if there is a whole talk of China and Pakistan as the whole all-weather friendship and very strong ties and everything, China understands that if there is a military confrontation where it needs allies, as US has, for example, Japan and South Korea and all of that, right? Australia and all of that, China does not have. Pakistan itself may promote terrorism in the back of, backyard of
China.
China, right? Which is also from their own experience of China-Russia relationship, with the China-Soviet Union relationship at that time, 50s I'm talking about, right? So China is well aware of this, this confrontation. So what China will do at a strategic level is to, impose certain kinds of pressures, which are, we call it as coercive pressures, at the point when it would need. Say, for example, it has a nuclear alliance with Pakistan. It has, you know, the Godar project. It has and it gradually it will push its military inside it so as to get the support of Pakistan. And Pakistan will not be in a state to say no to China. So what I see as a strategic this thing undercurrent is China is able to build up those relations. Say, for example, in Nepal, you see, I mean, when MOU was signed, even if Nepal has now signed MCC with US, it is so very burdened with the Chinese, support in many areas, whether it is Pokhara Airport, whether it is the army headquarters, which was built by the Chinese, that at times Nepal is not in a position to say no to China. You see, so in terms of the military confrontation, maybe they will not be able to take, either they will remain neutral or they will be forced to support China. So a kind of a tributary understanding would be created among the countries. So at that level, BRI is successful, and they're going to proceed with that, because the target at the last objective for China is one, as we talked earlier, is the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And for that, one of the things is very crucial is Taiwan needs to reunite with mainland China. Okay, that they are going to do by 2050. And when they would do that, definitely they would face a huge challenge for many countries. Now, how to, it's like, हम लोग बोलते हैं ना, जैसे कि, you have termites which literally makes holes within your countries and you will not be in a position to stand strong. This is what is the strategy in the BRI. I mean, you will build up infrastructure, you will give them money, you will have all kinds of infrastructure things which are controlled by the Chinese, and Chinese will have ownership in many areas. Then finally you will accept the rule of the Chinese leadership.
That
So
is interesting. I mean, because I wonder if they've bitten off more than they chew. Let's we'll keep that for another day, ma'am. But it's a
sure.
very interesting development that there is a country that found these little gaps within not very forefront and strong countries in the world, and influence them into its own game, to gain a certain charter, of course, and gain a certain edge strategically for themselves, uh, by either purposefully or by design pushing these countries into massive debts and so on and so forth. So it's a really interesting paradigm, and it's a really interesting discussion to have. Although a lot of people don't understand BRI. I mean, they've everybody's thought he was loan. It's a loan sharking event, sort of a thing. It's yeah, to a part, fair enough. But
But
as
even
you,
the RMB in internationalization, when it is using its
I
currency
was
as the is also a part of that
yeah,
BRI thing, whereby
I,
when the companies will start, I mean, say Pakistan has already agreed to
yeah,
deal with Russia in yuan. You see, so that will
yeah.
always come into play.
That is there. Unfortunately, Pakistan is not dealing with Russia. It is dealing with India. The Russian oil comes to India, gets refined, goes to UAE, changes the dollar and lands up there, and we are earning $17 per barrel. So,
Yes.
I mean, Pakistan is a amazing case and scenario. But you know what they did with Nepal, what
Hmm.
they're doing with Myanmar, what they're doing with Sri Lanka, what they tried to do with Maldives and
Yes.
Mauritius, what they wanted to do with Madagascar, Africa. It's quite clear what their motives are, and one needs to understand, because if you look at the Western criticism, and I think you've debunked some of that today, which I'm grateful to, because when you look at the Western criticism, all you hear is ये तो गया, ये तो गया, हो गया, सब कुछ
No,
बंद हो गया,
I
खत्म.
mean, see, because
That's
Western lens is looking at things from very economic perspective.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
But there is also other perspective which I think they have toned down, or maybe they are just ignoring, which is
yeah,
also the party relation, people to people exchanges. You know, this is where they start. I mean, the start doesn't come at the government to government level. We have a dealing, and it's there. That is one aspect you are looking at. But at the people level, say for example in Nepal, you see, the whole party, the people are so very communist now. I mean, it is very difficult. Anything which India deals, they they stand up with something like a very anti-India narrative and start
yeah,
talking about
yeah.
the
The red
communists.
flags come up immediately, and the literal red flags with the
Yes,
what's right there. So it's, yeah, you're absolutely right. That's something that it's I think not subversion, but in a very hard sense of influence.
right.
So I'd put it that. Ma'am, thank you so much for taking all the time in explaining this beautiful presentation to us, and the way that you put it across, right from the get go to where we are today and where you see this thing going in the future. I'm grateful. I will
Pleasure.
obviously serve you once more for another interesting subject. Till then, ma'am, Jai Hind.
Jai Hind to all your wills, and thank you very much.
Thank you.